my pleasure this morning to introduce the DoD Comptroller, Undersecretary Mike McCord. He is the Principal Advisor to the Secretary of Defense on all budgetary and financial matters. Before becoming Comptroller, Mike previously served for 5 years as the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Comptroller. And before that, he served on the Hill for 21 years, I believe, in the Senate Armed Services Committee. And before that, he was at the Congressional Budget Office. Mike is well known and well respected around the defense budget community. And so it's my pleasure to welcome him this morning.
Good morning. I had totally forgotten it was Cyber Monday. We should have set up something where if you wanted to buy us something, there'd be a link where you could get us another JSF or something. Good morning. Thanks, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here in this. I'm beautiful. I'm going to call it a new building. I know it's not brand new, but new to me. At a forum led by such a highly respected defense budget analyst for this outstanding institution. This is only the second time I've been to the new building. The first time 2 weeks ago I was in this very room. I was honored to be here for the farewell to your chairman at CSIS and your board chairman and my mentor, former Senator Sam Nunn. That event hosted by Dr. Hammer, your president. Both of us counted Sam Nunn as a mentor. I also, a little younger than John, get to count John as one of my mentors. This morning I'm here to talk about the new budget agreement and where it leaves us. Overall, bottom line, I think it's a good deal for DoD, and partly because of what it does, I mean, actual funding in the deal, but I think also as a hopeful sign, at least to me, hopeful sign of return to more problem solving and less brinksmanship, which we've had way too much of the last, most of my tenure in this position in DoD. Let me see, I need to figure out how to move my slides. Is this good? Here we go. All right. I just want to start with a quick look at where resources have been since 9/11. Total resources, including base funding and war funding, now called OCO, formerly called GWAT. Total defense resources doubled, over the decade of 2001 to 2010 and 2011, before leveling off and then declining somewhat. With this deal, we are getting back to where we were about 3 years ago in 2000, in nominal dollars at least, if not in real dollars. So we're back to leveling off. I think we're going to look for some rough stability in the top line over the next couple of years under this deal. I should also just say that throughout my talk and my slides here, I'm going to be talking about DoD numbers, 051 numbers for those of you who speak that language. So if you see references to the caps in here, they are not the caps in the budget deal. They are about 95% of those numbers, because we'd like to talk about inside the building our share of the budget deal. So those of you who might be looking at a number and saying, hey, that's not what I thought was in the deal. It's not. It's our estimate of our share, which is a very good approximation given what a large, we consume 95% of the defense side of the line, so it's a pretty good estimate in our respect. So again, we're looking to kind of level off at about the $580 billion level for both base and OCO over the next 2 years, a little lower than we were at the peak of high-intensity operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, but up from where we've been. So I want to talk, before we talk about the budget deal and going forward, a little bit about where we were heading into the budget negotiations, what we've been up to at DoD. I think that most of you are familiar with just about all the points I've listed here as things that we've been trying to achieve and the challenges that we've needed to respond to. I'd kind of sum it up by saying the range of national security challenges we face today, virtually all of which have a military dimension, every national security issue just about has a military dimension, has expanded to cover major portions of the globe geographically. We now talk about Asia Pacific, we talk about Europe again in a way that we weren't before, and of course the Middle East. And as well as a broad range of the spectrum of conflict, all the way from cyber to high-end conflict to the counterinsurgency to counterterrorism. So I can kind of translate that into we have to be ready for just about anything on the demand side, what we need to do. In terms of the resources and the support to accomplish all these missions, our budget has pretty much remained tied to the BCA sequester caps, in my opinion. the caps that were, as people occasionally remind me, it's hard to remember now, were never meant to be the final answer in the first place. They were meant to be a bad idea that forced a compromise. We've been able to get additional resources above that level through a variety of budget deals, including the one we're going to talk about today. But still, I think that the BCA caps exert a strong gravitational pull on our resources, and I think we'll have some charts later on to talk about that. I think this is in part because of the existence of OCO, which allows you some flexibility when things come up, like the recent counter-ISIL operations. OCO can flex your budget up a little bit without requiring people to fundamentally reassess the whole deal and whether your resources are right in the big picture. So you can tweak at the margins without having to go examine your fundamental assumptions. So what I've seen from the resource side, the demand has I think, broadened, not necessarily in intensity, but certainly in diversity, I would say, which requires us to do a lot of hard looking at balancing. A lot of balancing is a key thing we think about all the time here between near term and far term, between the size of the force and the abilities of the force. In that period of time, we've had, I would say, kind of lukewarm congressional support for many of the things that we thought were necessary and still think are necessary to make ourselves as efficient as we can be and to get rid of some lower priority issues, lower priority platforms, to move from legacy issues to invest in the future. And I think many of you are familiar with all kinds of these issues, whether it's the A-10 or BRAC or a number of things. We've had instability in terms of our budget picture. We've had a series of short-term deals that usually come at the last minute. And as I have, one of the things that we live with, probably more so than most people in the Comptroller organization and also in the services, is the CR issue, which I think is not probably thought about that much outside this area. I would suppose, probably not front page news item anywhere, but little by little, the situation has gotten to where we have had the worst record in the last 30 years in this administration in terms of getting our funding on time. Not since kind of the first term of Ronald Reagan have we seen this many CRs that lasted this long. And I did the math for our secretary and our deputy a couple months ago, and got their attention by pointing out that we have actually spent from FY10 through 15, the 6 full fiscal years we've completed now with this administration, 1/3 of that time, 24 months out of 6 years under a CR. Sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months, but on average, 1/3 of the time, which essentially, de facto shrinks our fiscal year to about 9 months instead of 12 months in terms of being able to execute new ideas. So that's kind of the situation we faced, I would say, uncertain funding, increasing demand, and poor performance on getting our funding in time as we head into the budget deal. So we certainly had some opportunities to do better, and I think this deal did do better, but things were not what we wanted them to be heading into the deal. I would say that I think one of the things that helped us in the deal was that we have been pretty consistent as a department in the FY15 budget and the FY16 budget for a period of over 2 to 2.5 years in terms of talking about what we were trying to accomplish and all the 3 basic aspects of strategy, of strategic thought, of ways, ends, and means, what we were trying to accomplish, the size of force that we felt we needed to accomplish it with, and the amount of resources we felt were necessary to underwrite the force and the capabilities we desired. We have been pretty consistent about saying where the budget needed to go in the 15 budget and the 16 budget. Again, I'll have some charts that will kind of do that a little more visually. But I think, again, I believe it helped us in that our committees, at least, our defense committees, I think, knew pretty well where we were coming from. They understood what we said we needed and why we needed it. And I think that probably helped us in terms of the thought process. We hadn't been out there kind of all over the map in terms of what resources we needed. And so I think that was well understood by a large block of members heading into the budget deal. This chart is a very busy one. We've talked about this chart or something like this a lot inside the building. I'm not going to beat it to death here. But the line on the top is the resource plan the department had when the Budget Control Act was signed. This was the budget that had been submitted earlier in the year of 2011. Sort of the starting point of how we measure the resource pressure we felt from the BCA since then. The next line down, which is kind of a goldish color, after the BCA was signed, this was the budget we submitted, we recognized that we were going to have to cut $500 billion over 10 years out of the plan that we had had under Secretary Gates. This was what our chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the time, Mike Mullen, who knew his way around the budget, called the first $500 billion, because he rightly suspected this wasn't the only cuts we were going to end up taking. But this was what we wrote the Defense Strategic Guidance to. Some of you may remember in January 2012, the President came to the Pentagon, stood there with the Secretary, with Deputy Secretary Carter and others, and talked about our strategy. So when we talk about the strategy, can we resource the strategy? Do the resources support the strategy? We're touching back to really where we were at this point in January of 2012 and the PB13 budget. We came in a little lower than that in PB14, and then as Deputy Secretary Carter was then Deputy Secretary Carter, now Secretary Carter, along with the Vice Chairman, led a strategic choices and management review, and that looked at a range of what we thought we could support, given the new reality of the Budget Control Act. What range of resources did we think was necessary to support our strategy at an acceptable risk level? And that is sketched out in kind of a gray area between with the blue PB14 line at the top, and you can kind of see it hitting some of the other lines on the bottom there. What we've been trying to do ever since, and this gets to my point of being consistent on the resource side, is we've been telling people we needed to drive our budget back up to the level that was kind of covered by that grayish risk band. And that's what the FY15 budget said we needed to do. That's what the FY16 budget said. That's what the FY17 budget will say. And the budget deal helps us do a substantial portion of that. So if you look at it in terms of what I would call maybe a normal taxpayer kitchen table point of view, you would say, well, your budget sure dropped like a rock, in 13 and stayed there for 3 years, but the world didn't seem to come to an end. You could live with a lower level of resources for 3 straight years. You sure are asking for a big increase. We did ask for a big increase in 16, but I will say that we had telegraphed that very well. We had said in the 15 budget we needed a big jump in 16. We had said in the 16 budget. We had been pretty consistent saying that's where we needed to get back up to that range. So I think that we had at least well prepared the battlefield in terms of budget discussions for saying what we needed. The 15 budget, of course, was informed by the Murray Ryan deal. We then, wrote the 15 budget to the second year of the deal, very much like we're going to write the 17 budget to the second year of the new deal that we have today. The bottom of this chart also shows something that I'm going to get back to just a little bit later, the difference between there being a dashed red line and a solid red line. The dashed red line is the kind of the worst case once the super committee failed set of sequester caps, and we've gotten relief every year since then. This shows where those caps stood right before the budget deal was enacted. I will then show you a chart, the next chart here, that now shows you how the caps have moved up since then. So again, if you look all the way out now through FY17, you'll see that every year the actual caps, the solid red line, are higher than the worst case caps. This represents the relief that we've been able to get through 3 different budget deals, the American Taxpayers Relief Act, the Murray Ryan deal, and this new Balanced Budget Act of 15. So every year, this is a point that I think really jumps out at you. Every year since the super committee failed, we have never gotten the worst case. We've also never gotten the president's budget either, except for when the president's budget was written to be the second year of the Murray Ryan deal. And that will be, again, something that will be true next year. The budget request and the caps will coincide because they're part of a freshly agreed to set of numbers. But other than that, it's been a negotiation every year where there's a great deal of uncertainty. You know that you're going to be somewhere in the range between where the president is and where the Budget Control Act is, but where are you going to end up? That's been sort of a painfully slow process. We don't get the best case, we don't get the worst case. So I want to then take you back again. I'm not sure everybody thinks this way, but I will tell you that a lot of folks in the building do, is they look at where we started before the Budget Control Act, and you look at the worst case. Once the super committee failed, we were looking at $1 trillion of cuts. And we often come back inside the building to where are we in that range of taking the whole $1 trillion of cuts with no relief whatsoever for the entire 10-year period. And we're actually fairly close to the worst case, even with 3 budget deals that have helped us. So when I talked about what Mike Mullen, former chairman Mike Mullen, called the first $500 billion, and that being the 13 budget, that recognized what we were going to have to do no matter what. Even had the super committee succeeded, we owed $500 billion off of where we were heading into the Budget Control Act. That's that blue line that bisects this chart, okay? The green line shows where we've actually ended up so far, including this new Balanced Budget Act. So we've gotten about $75 billion of relief so far over 6 years, so you can kind of do the math. That's an average of roughly 15 years. That's the difference between that green line and the red line on the bottom of that box. So you can see this gets to my earlier point. When I say that I feel like the Budget Control Act has really been a key driver of our resource levels, exerting what I call the strong gravitational pull. If you look at the big picture, whether you start from that black line at the top or even start from the middle of that box, which was something that the President and Congress agreed DoD would have to give up those resources, even had the super committee succeeded in finding other offsets. You can see that we're still pretty close to the bottom of the bucket compared to the top since the BCA, and that's when I say that, again, that it's really been a dominant force in my opinion. I'm going to kind of skip past this next chart because I think that these will be available. This kind of walks through the math of those charts of what resource level we had, the couple of jumps that we've had to take us down when the super committee failed, the couple of jumps back up that we've had through the ATRA, the Murray-Ryan deal, and this new budget deal, which again net us about $78 billion of relief. And then we are then, and probably I can best show this just by going to the next chart. If nothing else happened and we went back to, let's say that we went back to the caps. There's no deal coming after this 2-year deal expires, and we go back to the bottom of that box. We will have gotten about $78 billion of relief. We will have absorbed about $900 billion of cuts out of the trillion over 10 years if we get no further relief after this deal. So what that kind of gold line then represents is the out years of our plan, which again have been pretty consistent through the 15 and 16 budget. I expect will be pretty consistent in the 17 budget of the out year profile that we say that we need. There's about another $100 billion at stake there of relief. The difference between what we're saying, what you will see in our out years compared to what the worst case of going back to the caps is. So that's more relief in the last 4 years of the deal than we've been able to achieve in the first 6 through these variety of budget deals. So it's still a lot at stake, but our best case now, more or less, I can't predict exactly what the next budget will be, and of course I can't predict what the next administration's budget position will be. But if you look at the position that we've had in the FY16 budget, in the fit-up that we presented to Congress and you can find in the budget, we would still absorb about $800 billion of cuts over 10 years. That's the best case at this point, and the worst case is probably 900, just based on the BCA being what it is. So that again kind of shows you that the range is much closer to being driven by the BCA, which is surprising when you think about some of the changes in world events. But again, I think none of them have really caused people to re-examine the construct of the BCA as a fundamental grounding point for many members in terms of political discussion about where should the defense budget be or where should the discretionary budget be as a whole. So I've been kind of surprised by the resilience of it in a way. Why did we have a budget deal? I'm not going to dwell on this. I think these are arguments that we've made before, but why did we have the budget deal? Partly because of the dispute over the OCO maneuver in the budget resolution, which the President made clear was unacceptable to him. And so just to refresh you, here are some of the concerns we had about that approach. In the end, you may think this is easy for me to say now, but I think that we were right to hold out for a deal and not just go along with this one-time maneuver that would help us for 1 year. In the end, we got 2-year top-line stability instead of just 1 year, and we got help for both the defense and the non-defense whole of government side of the budget, not just for the DoD part. So Secretary Carter was never about just helping ourselves at DoD get our number fixed for 1 year. He was hoping for something that would, help Homeland Security and DOJ and the Treasury and all the other players on the national security team, as well as the non-defense side, which is where the VA and other important agencies are. So in the end, although we didn't get all the money that we wanted out of this deal, we felt good about the outcome in And I think that our reluctance to just go for the short-term easy solution helped produce the outcome that we got in this budget deal. So let me talk about, just give a few observations of my own about what the deal does and doesn't do. Of course, it provides additional resources, less than everything we wanted, but still pretty good. It removes the threat of default. We don't talk about that a lot at DoD, but it removes the threat of default for 2 years, which would seem like maybe not a great accomplishment for the world's most powerful economy. But still, for our economic security, that's not something to take for granted. Provides near-term predictability at the top line, which is important for us. Came early enough in November to give us time to actually figure out how to meet the targets in at least a quasi-rational way in the 17 budget before we have to wrap it up, and to work with the appropriators to at least give them our views on how the top line should be adjusted downward in 16. They will make the final decisions, but we did provide them with our thoughts and our input there. It established OCO targets, which is new. I don't remember ever seeing those before in my 30 years in this business, having a pre-agreed target on what emergency type spending will be in the budget yet to be submitted. That's kind of an odd concept, but we think we can work with that. Therefore, because of the last point, one of the things this new budget deal does is alter the rules about what's in base and what's in OCO, and alters the relationship between base and OCO funding, at least for this 2-year period. And I expect we'll probably talk about that some in the discussion part. The only offset of in this bill that probably affects us down the road is it requires a future spectrum auction. We are big users of spectrum, so down the road, 10 years from now, there'll be an impact on us. That won't be fully known for at least 5 years, probably when the particular bands of spectrum are identified, but that is something that we have a little concern about. There are mechanisms in place to make us whole, should they continue to work properly. This budget deal also strengthens our key interagency partners. Again, that was very important to Secretary Carter, that we not just help ourselves and have everybody else out there, one man in the lifeboat watching everybody else flailing around was not his idea of success. And I would say also, just from one of the key partners that we work with on a daily basis at State, this deal is probably a mixed bag for them. The way that there's OCO relief was written for the non-defense side is entirely directed at the 150 function, at the State Department functions. So they are going to be highly leveraged on OCO when this administration ends, in a way that I would be very uncomfortable with if I was the CFO over there instead of at DoD. They're going to be much more leveraged than we are, and therefore a lot more uncertain as they head into the next administration. Of course, some of the things that the deal doesn't do, it doesn't give us any targets specific to DoD. As I said, it's a defense function that we share with NNSA and other folks. It doesn't actually provide us money. Hence, the next stage of this thing is actually getting an omnibus appropriation bill on time. We can't spend a framework, as important as a framework is. So therefore, also, it does not prevent a shutdown, since absence of a omnibus appropriation bill. This deal alone doesn't help us prevent a shutdown, although it's a very hopeful sign that people are about solving problems here and that we won't have that situation come up. Does not provide any guidance about what happens after this budget deal ends in 2 years. So I regard it as pretty much of a jump ball. It continues the pattern of short-term relief in small increments, but it doesn't absolutely guarantee you anything or make any commitments about what will happen. Therefore, the threat of sequester coming back for 18, 19, 20, and 21, when it is still the law unless and until changed, is not removed by this budget deal. Again, you can make assumptions about whether this is a good sign or a bad sign, but we'll have new players in town, and there's no guarantees about what the future holds as to whether we're going to have sequester or not returning. Does not extend the spending caps. This was actually something that was very important to us. Probably our top priority when we talked to OMB as they headed into the negotiations. We did not want to see these caps extended even further because, as I'll talk about in a minute, the decade of the 20s is when we really need probably additional resources even above where we are today to start recapitalizing the nuclear triad. And that would be one of the worst times we can imagine to have the caps being extended. So one of the best things about this deal for us was something that you did not see in the deal. And finally, you can make judgments, as I might, about whether this particular way of treating war spending or OCO spending in this deal is ever going to be repeated or not. But I would just say on the plain letter, but it doesn't really tell us the future of that, whether this was a one-time, something needed to make the deal work as a compromise, or whether it's going to be perpetuated in the future. That uncertainty, I think, is one of the key things that I think we all need to keep an eye on. And let me just give you one example. The European Reassurance Initiative started, the president's speech was only a little over a year ago. We got some money put in 15. The 16 level was somewhat comparable. We're going to ramp that up in the 17 budget. The exact number we're still debating, but it's going to be a pretty significant increase. But then what? The music's going to stop. There's a budget deal that then ends, and the future of OCO is sort of indeterminate. This administration had one sort of construct for handling war funding. The previous administration had a slightly different concept. The next administration may have a third concept, or they may use one of the two that we had, the GWAT approach or the OCO approach. But in any case, here will our European Reassurance Initiative be, having ramped up in 17, almost certainly in OCO, and then we head into a situation where the future of OCO is not clear at all. Not the ideal way that you would like to do things. But again, the deal overall is very good for us. I don't want to be nitpicking, but just saying there are concerns about it that as we look to the future. Let me just talk about the near term for a second. This chart kind of illustrates where the president's budget was for 16 and 17 as we submitted it early this year. Where the caps were in the red, our budget was in the blue, and not surprisingly, as many compromises go, in the middle is where we ended up with this budget deal. What I've shaded in at the top is the OCO relief that many of you have probably read about. It's been described as $8 billion or up to $8 billion in each of the years, and that's compared to the level we were at, the demand signal that we had in the 16 budget. To me, the OCO relief is not really $8 billion because the president decided shortly before this deal was agreed to extend the higher troop level in Afghanistan, and that had a bill that was not contained in our 16 plans. So that bill is a good $3 billion a year, a little more than that. So I think of the OCO relief really as 5 myself compared to our new cost of doing business, including keeping more troops in Afghanistan going forward. $5 billion of relief is still a good thing, but that's how I sort of count it. So that extra cost is one thing, and as the attack on Paris reminded us, the enemy has a vote. So I can't necessarily control or predict my OCO cost. In any case, I can predict that this extra cost, this extra troop presence in Afghanistan will have a cost, but I can't predict what else will happen. But given that, knowing what we know today, I would say that under this deal, we got about 98% of what we were asking for in 16 as the Defense Department, not counting this OCO relief, and probably 99% of the total funding we were seeking, including it. For 17, it's a little less, about 96% without the OCO relief, maybe 97% with it. Now, as I say to my family, certainly, 97% of what you want is a good day for most people, and I count it as such for us for both years. On the other hand, for our budget is pretty large, so 3% cut of what we were asking for is still over $15 billion. That's a lot of money to cut out, but still, we got. If you look at the difference between another way to measure deals, I was sort of counting from the $0 up, all the way from 0 to $530 billion. We were getting 96, 97% of what we wanted, 17, 98, 99% in 16. If you look just at the space between where the president was and where the caps were, we probably got 80% of the way up in 16, maybe halfway, more like halfway. But that's still, not surprising, and that is more relief sooner and a better deal overall for us than Murray Ryan was, just to put it in perspective. And later on, we could talk about any implications, again, of on the base versus OCO side going forward. That's going to be kind of one of the quirks of this deal. So now looking beyond the budget deal, as I know that you want to do today, again, we have to think about so many dimensions now, from the cyber, to terrorism, counterinsurgency, all the way up to high-end conflict. We have to think about in temporal terms today as well as 20 years from now. We have to build a force that does many things well. So here are some of the things that are on our plate, I think, in terms of building this budget, building this program. Balance again, is a key point for us, the size of the force, the readiness of the force, the high-end capabilities of the force. I think many of you are familiar with, hopefully, with Secretary Carter's priorities, which he's been very clear about, investing in the force of the future, which is how to get as much talent, the same kind of talent, if not even better talent, 20 years from now than we have today, as well as innovation in our investments and trying to keep pace with both the way that technology is delivered today and with innovative business practices, since we compete for talent in so many realms, and we compete for technology. So Secretary Carter, of course, is focused on getting things done today, but I say he's even more so on building for tomorrow and leaving his successors with the same best military in the world that we have today. I wish I could say that I had long-term budget stability or predictability to underwrite the investments that we want to make as a department. I do not have that, of course. We do know some of the big issues on our plate, one of which I've alluded to is the big bill that's coming to recapitalize our nuclear deterrent, at least if it stays in its current form. And second, across our society, we have the mass migration of the baby boom to full retirement. And I'll just take a second to show you a chart that does that. This is something that CBO did. They do a long-term budget outlook, and I kind of fiddled around with how to put it into a picture. The revenue line kind of is this dark line going across the top, and I kind of stacked these from the bottom to the top in terms of what I'd call ability to pay or difficulty of cutting, and maybe a rough must-pay order. By 2020, the entire non-defense budget could be construed as sort of above the line of what is covered by the revenues that come in. By 2035, the entire discretionary budget, both defense and non-defense, is above the line. And that period, as I've just described, 2020 to 2035, is a key period for us because that's the era that we're going to need to recap the triad when we're going to need a bump up in resources. So not maybe the ideal situation in which we find ourselves here of lack of budget stability and predictability in the near term, and knowing that we have this fiscal pressure driven by demographics going forward. So, coming back a little bit more just to the near term, where will things be for the next administration? This is one of the reasons we feel fairly good about this new budget deal. You can see where we were the first 3 years of this administration. We were about the $530 billion level. Then we got run over by the BCA train, as I like to think of it. Driven down, we had a $35 billion drop in our budget in 1 year, and then we stayed down for about 3 years in that about $495 billion range, about $35 billion below where we had been. We've managed to jump ourselves up with this budget deal back up, just about $30 billion above where we had been. And you can see I've kind of put in my estimate of the real OCO relief here of about $5 billion above what the nominal caps are in this new deal. So, first of all, obviously there's help here and now, right? I'd rather be at $522 billion today than being at $495 again for the fourth year in a row. Same for next year. But even more important to me is when you'll notice I haven't connected the 16 and 17 line to any particular future. I've kind of left a gap there. So when the next administration, the next Congress show up 2 years from now, sometime in calendar year 2017, probably not before the summer, maybe in the fall. Hopefully there'll be another budget deal. That seems like the time would be right, based on past history at least. And I certainly would be glad, if for the Defense Department, that my successors will be starting, and the Secretary's successors will be starting from a place where we're negotiating from the 520, mid 520s, not the mid 490s, in terms of even if they went back to the caps where we kind of be flat, we would head over there. But hopefully, we can jump back up to where we think we need. You can see that the jump that we made in this year was difficult to achieve based on where we've been for the last 3 years. It would have been impossible, I think, to jump up to that yellow line at the top of where we think we need to go had we stayed down here in 16 and 17. At least it's doable. It will require a comparable jump probably in 18, from 17 to 18 to what was accomplished in this budget deal. But this budget deal does show that it's possible. And again, I think it sets us up fairly well for the future. Given all factors considered, I think this is not a bad place to be. And I certainly would rather be starting from here to have the negotiation for the future of the defense budget, starting from where we are with this deal than where we had been the last 2 or 3 years. So I think that's an important point. Finally, just a couple observations on the defense budget over the last couple of years of what I've seen. The President's defense request has been the ceiling for these negotiations, which is a little different than what I would call, growing up earlier in my career, what I was used to a traditional partisan politics on defense, that the Democratic president's position is the high water mark. That's a little different than what history has sometimes shown in the past, but that's kind of been the case here, a little unusual. Second, again, a point I've made before, we've never kind of had either the full worst case or the full best case. We've never gotten everything we wanted since the super committee failed. We've also never had the absolute worst case. There's been some relief, but that relief comes in 1 or 2 year doses, not until late in the year, not when you can really, as early as you would like to plan for it. It's sort of like Christmas. You know it's coming, but you have to wait for it. We have never gotten, 2-year deals. We've had 2 2-year deals now and 1 even shorter term deal that delayed sequester and reduced it slightly. So again, I would say that our top line is still dictated heavily by BCA. I feel like it's had a stronger gravitational pull downward than any changes in the world security situation or the combined, desire of the President and several secretaries and several chairmen of the Joint Chiefs to raise that defense budget up. We've had some success in getting additional resources, but it's been a fight. There's no guarantee of success, and I'd say except for one tiny little bit here and there, all these increases to the BCA that DoD has gotten, or for that matter that the non-defense side have gotten, have had to be paid for. So the construct is really it's kind of a supply of resources as much as it is a demand pull of what are the national security requirements of the country. These deals seem to be driven to me largely by what can people come up with resources that they can get people agree to that generally have not included much of any revenues. That's kind of been our constraining factor. So again, that just points out to me that the BCA remains a dominant factor, even though you don't find a lot of fans of it around here. It's remained a dominant factor in setting defense resource priorities. And finally, just that we will, by virtue of this deal, still be dependent on OCO funding when we exit this administration. I know there was a strong desire by this administration to do a little better on that front, and to have more resources out of OCO and into the base budget when we left, but that's not going to be achieved under this deal. So it is what it is. I think it's still a good deal for us, but that's one thing that we left as an important variable for the future. So that's my summary. I don't know if I was going to call it a quick summary. I don't know if that's fair to call it quick or not, but that's my summary of kind of some of the key aspects of resourcing that we've been looking at over the last couple of years, and how I think that on balance this deal is good for us, but leaves a couple points hanging, in particular on the OCO side. So with that, I thank you and look forward to a discussion with Todd and any questions that you have.
Thank you. All right. And so just as a way of getting us started here, can you give us a bit of a status update on where things stand in the FY 2017 budget process within the Pentagon? You're
Sure.
near the end of the program review. Mm-hmm. Where do things stand right now?
Yep, sure. We are near the end of building a 17 budget, but not at the end. There's probably about 3 weeks to go. I'd say we need to be completely done in a little less than 3 weeks now, 2.5 to 3 weeks. So it's crunch time for sure. Normally, in a normal year, I think you would be getting pass back from OMB, for those of you who know what that is, would often come today, the Monday after Thanksgiving. I think this week, we're not going to get it this week. We're probably going to get it as late as a week from today instead. But we are near the end of program review. We have a couple more issues to discuss, to finalize, and the European Reassurance Initiative is one of them, as well as the particulars of OCO funding, and I think compensation questions are still out on the table a little bit. So we have a couple of issues. We've discussed just about everything at least once. We've got a couple to bring to a closure, and then we need to get a little more quality time with the Secretary, who is going to be hard to reach in the next couple days. He's got a hearing again tomorrow. But we are very close to the end, and I think we're in decent shape, but we do have a couple big issues to wrestle to the ground, and we have not seen our pass back yet. That'll probably come in about a week. But we are looking to lock this up well before Christmas. I do anticipate the budget will be submitted on time.
on which is as early as it can be this year because of the calendar February 1st. So we can't assume that we'll have any additional time, and we do want to let this get locked up and let people hopefully enjoy a little Christmas because they're done. So that's our shared goal between CAPE and Comptroller and the front office OMB. I think we all want to kind of get this wrapped up on time, and I'm pretty confident that we will.
And so, we kind of have an idea, even though you haven't gotten the pass back from OMB, we have a pretty good idea of the top line because of the budget deal. So, it's about a $15 billion reduction in the base budget compared to what was planned for FY17 in last year's request. So given the magnitude of that reduction, should we expect any major program terminations or any major deviations from planned modernization programs? I'm thinking in particular the F-35 is supposed to be ramping up in production, the LRSB is supposed to be ramping up in funding. Are we going to see any deviations because of this?
I think that you'll probably see one of the ways that we will accommodate this $15 billion or so cut is there will probably be some slowdowns in some modernization programs. And of course, LRSB had a little bit of a delay driven by its own schedule dynamics anyway. But yeah, I think that there will be some slowdowns in a few places. Compensation we need to relook just based so we get all the new inflation factors and so on in that are an important part of that dynamic. Military retirement, just enacted in the authorization bill the president signed a few days ago will be taken into account in our new budget. It's not got a huge near-term impact, but it will be, I think, it will not be a net increase for us, and it might even be the actuaries need to kind of finalize their determination. That's one thing we're waiting on. But I think it might actually be a net slight savings for us. So I think that was a good accomplishment from this year in terms of having something that kind of updates our compensation system for retirees and gets more people a benefit without making our situation any worse. So I think that's a positive for us.
And that's in FY17, it might be a slight decrease. In FY18, 19, 20, it's more of a decrease?
No, I think it will be kind of flat across the years. We just need to get a final call from the actuaries on what the impact is. And then another point I'd make is that given that this budget deal sends a short-term signal, it tells you what your top line is for 16, where the pen has already left our hands, right? It's with the appropriations committees, and we've got 1 year of new top line to write to in 17. I would not expect any major changes in the size of the force because there is that, a short-term deal doesn't give you the demand signal to say I really need to shrink my force to accommodate, the top lines because again, we don't really have. Based on history, I'd say you don't really know that you're going to be living with the BCA top lines from 18, 19, 20, 21. I mean, it's out there in the law, but history shows you never live with the worst case, at least under this deal. So we already know what the worst case is. That hasn't changed. What we don't know is what the best case is. We have some hope for getting some additional resources. So I think in terms of having the leverage to say we need to shrink the force, because we know that we're going to be living with less. We don't know what we're going to be living with, so I don't think you'll see a big move on that side because that's such a hard thing to do without a clear imperative. Given the demands on the force, nobody really wants to shrink the force that much if we don't have to, and you don't really have that case to make that you have to.
All right. So let's turn to OCO funding for a minute. In the last budget request, it talked about migrating these so-called enduring requirements from the OCO budget to the base budget. Kind of sounds like a euphemism to me. But the trends seem to be going in the opposite direction. And we see it in this budget deal, putting OCO money in there that is deliberately intended for the base budget. And it's not even new to this budget deal. Congress has done similar things in the past. So are we at a point now where the lines between OCO and base have been blurred, that there's no meaningful distinction anymore? And do we need to get new guidance on what counts as OCO and how this is going to be used in the future, given that it has evolved?
Well, I would say yes, they have blurred. No, they've not blurred to the point of having no meaning, but they certainly have blurred. And you're right, Todd. The desire of the administration was to ramp OCO down. Remember, of course, that as we had ramped down the presence in Iraq. The president had intended to get us pretty much out of the combat mission in Afghanistan, and it therefore seemed like a pretty natural thing to also ramp down OCO, which we had built up some dependencies over the years, largely, I think, unintentionally, but as a matter of, maybe course of least resistance. And so, yeah, the budget for 16 laid out a plan to get us sort of out of OCO, except for direct war costs by FY 2020. And as you said, the trend went exactly the opposite way in terms of where the budget resolution headed as a way to solve this year's particular budget problem. And it became obvious to us at DoD early on that the climate was totally wrong for trying to accomplish this goal of transitioning OCO down to a lower level and getting more of these costs back into the base budget. And you might ask, well, why would anyone care as long as you have money? And there is, at the end of the day, that there is a point to that. But there are organizations, SOCOM's a good example, that are heavily dependent on OCO. They're not particularly comfortable having the majority of their budget being in OCO, and they would like to have a more, everyone would like to kind of be below the line and have only your absolute incremental costs be above the line, but it was clear to us that's not achievable, so that will be left hanging. And again, I've cited ERI, the European Reassurance, as an issue, something that you could argue, presence and your posture, your activities, your exercise level in Europe. Europe's a place we've been for decades. Why would anything in Europe be in OCO? But ERI, I think, under this deal is going to be in OCO. And again, just if you looked at what our requirements are going in, which I think were fairly well known to people, and the OCO number is bigger than that, some rule has to change, right? And it's not yet, I think, agreed between us and OMB what rules will change or what items will have to be reclassified. But it does send a confused signal to the future. I mean, it's obvious to me, at least, why it ended up this way, and that you could change the deal at the margins without having to get fundamentally re-examine and commit to the future with a long-term budget deal this way. But yeah, not ideal for us, but compromises. This to me was just part of a compromise. It's not the way we would have written it. So we had a desire to ramp down on OCO. We had a desire to ramp up on OCO from the other side, and they compromised with this sort of temporary thing that leaves a lot of questions hanging about what people want OCO to be. When you think about it, there's only a couple ways to fund contingency activities. You can give the executive branch the money up front with not a lot of strings, or you can give it to them up front with a lot of strings, or you can wait till after the fact when you mostly incurred the expenses and present Congress with a bill they have not much choice except to pay. So before and after and what degree of strings, there's only so many ways to skin this cat. I think that we may well see some new formulation of how to pay for contingency funding with the new administration, although I really couldn't guess what that might be at this point. But ultimately, there's only so many models that you can do.
So let's talk about something that I hear keep coming up a lot of times is DoD audit readiness. Mm-hmm. DoD has not yet passed a clean audit. It's been in the works for a while. It's been delayed many times. Can you give us a bit of an update on where DoD stands in terms mm-hmm. of getting to an audit? And help tell us, we've got a pretty smart audience here. Why is it hard for DoD to pass a clean audit?
Okay. We have a goal that we set out that Congress then came back and agreed with us on and legislated that we would submit the entire department for a full audit of all. There's 4 statements that go with the full audit in 2017. So that's the fall of 2017. So presumably there will be a different CFO most likely when that happens. And then Secretary Panetta, who when he was here felt that 5 years or so was too far away to have an interim goal. Without an interim goal, he felt we needed an interim goal, so he established one to submit an audit on our current year statements for the fall of this last fall, the fall of 2014, 2015. I'm sorry, and so we have done now submitted audits for the Army, Navy, Air Force. They're under audit now. One of them has just come back with a disclaimer, which is pretty much what we expected the first time out, and we are likely to get those for the other 2 as well. But we are making a lot of progress. One of the things that I was talking about on the top line aspect that we had in terms of what resources we needed and what size of force we needed, we've been fairly consistent over the last couple of years, which I think helped us. The same is true on the audit side. We've had a plan that we have basically stuck to the framework of, and we've been trying to kind of work down the to-do list of things to get done. But we haven't changed the plan a lot in the last couple of years, and we're not going to change the plan at this time either, just because we got a disclaimer, which will not surprise us when you get started on these. So we have the benefit, everybody knows what the plan is and is kind of working together on this plan. It's going to be a journey. It will last beyond my time there, most likely. We are making progress. Why is it difficult for us? I think largely, our size and complexity, of course, is one thing, and I think people probably appreciate how big we are in terms of, we have millions of employees. Our budget is the size of a pretty good-sized economy, say Belgium, in terms of, or the Netherlands. So we are not a small organization at all. We have, I think something like 25 million acres of land. We have 500,000 buildings. So our size and complexity is part, but that's probably not the main reason. I think the main reasons are probably two. One, that we have so many systems that were built to do something else that need to work together and to produce information in a way that auditors can use and verify, which is not what they were built for. And we're too big to just sort of blow up all our systems and go buy one new gargantuan IT system that runs the entire department. So we have to kludge together all kinds of logistics systems, personnel systems with financial systems, and that's been a difficult effort. And second, I think culturally we're an organization that's all about getting the mission done. And this has not been, and probably never will be, seen as the department's primary mission. It's not the department's primary mission, right? The primary mission is to defend the nation, fight and win wars. So the trick has been to get our culture to see this as a mission that needs to get done, even though it will never be the top mission of the department, but to bring that same attitude of this is something that we need to get done because we are about accomplishing missions. And that, I think, is what we actually have been achieving over the last couple of years. But it's kind of hard. It's hard to measure, and I will tell you that some members of Congress have said to me, they will concede that you guys actually have a plan that makes sense, and you appear to be following your plan, and you are moving the ball down the field. But it's not in the end zone, and that's really what counts at the end of the day is results. And we don't have that, and so it's hard to assess progress when you don't see the ball in the end zone. But I will tell you the progress actually is there, and one evidence of that to me is that we've had. By my count, I think actually 0 hearings about the audit this year, which is surprising. Of course, there's a lot else going on of pretty high importance from ISIL to other subjects. And we have, as we talked about under this deal, less resources, right? We have headquarters cuts, we have financial cuts to absorb. And so one thing that you might say, well, what's something that maybe we need to dial back on? Should we slow down the audit effort? There's been pretty strong resistance in the services to doing that. And so I think to me, there's a couple signs. That's one of them, that culturally, this is now a mission that we want to get done. We don't have to be pushed. We don't have to be beaten. We don't have to be, have hearings or sticks or other things to make us want to do that. People actually have internalized this now as a goal. But it's just going to be difficult to get there for us, I think, given our size and complexity and the need to get so many parts of the community, the logisticians and the personnel community, everybody else working together. But I think we are on the right track, and I think that history will look back and say that. But it will take a couple more years, to get this going. But my predecessor, Bob Hale, was fond of characterizing this as saying you can't learn to swim on the beach. You have to actually get into it to really learn things. You need to have independent auditors come in and say, here's what you're doing right, here's what you're not doing right, and that's where we are now. So we are, I think, going to learn at a more rapid rate now that we actually are in audit, even though the initial results will be you weren't good enough to get a clean audit.
So you need a couple of failures in order to get your books,
I think you do.
And just to be clear, so it sounds like
and you need to stop practicing and actually be getting grades, not doing test prep, which is kind of what we've been doing a lot of. That's important. As you go in to take the SAT or pass an audit or anything else, you want to prepare, but at some point, you need to take the test and find out if you're good enough or where you're not good enough.
So it sounds like a lot of the challenge here is really an IT issue of getting legacy data systems just to talk to each other.
And business processes too, because the IT system to some extent mirror, if you have a bad process and put in a new computer system, you still have a bad process, so it's.
And the other thing of this that I hear a lot is people talking about, well, you can't pass an audit. Why should we give you a budget increase? Mm-hmm. Can you clear up something here? Once DoD does pass an audit, what is the likelihood that you find like, oh my goodness, there was $100 billion sitting around here, and if now we have all the money we need. You know, are we going to see anything like that happen from an audit?
That's a good question. I do find that, I mean, I find that the premise of that viewpoint or that question like that understandable, but a little frustrating. Yes, the fact that we haven't passed an audit means that our business practices are not everything that they should be. It does not mean that we don't know what we do with the money. You occasionally hear that kind of mischaracterization. Well, they don't even know where the money is or what they do with the money. Believe me, we have, among other things, we have 535 members on our board of directors, as well as the public, every contractor. If Congress gives us money, you know, gives us X billion dollars to buy this many ships or F-15s or whatever it is, people know if we did or didn't buy those things. And the same with paying our people, which is paying our people consumes half our budget, by the way, between military and civilian pay and benefits. So if people weren't getting paid, you know, you would know about it, I would know about it. So
A couple of million watchdogs
it's a misnomer to think that the resources come in and nobody knows what happens to them. The issue with audit is being able to demonstrate going from the order to the invoice to the expenditure, everything connected in a way that the auditors, when they pull records, find, you know, meets auditing standards, which is different than saying it's not the Wild West where nobody knows what's going on. That being said, I think if you do have your business processes refined at that point where you are passing an audit, there will be some efficiencies to be had. There will be some things you discover about yourself that will free up some additional resources. But that's true of audit. That's true of any number of efficiency drills. You know, I recall when I see Ray sitting here in the front row when his boss, Secretary Rumsfeld, came in, I think was being confirmed early, about in 2001. He said, any organization can be run more efficiently. So we're not saying that's why you do efficiency. There's no pretense here that we're perfect, and we recognize that that's true. It's true today as it was when he said it about 15 years ago that you place can be more efficient. So that this is one of many efforts. One that I think has broad support. That people recognize that we should be passing an audit. Other ones, sadly, like base closure, have not had quite such broad support, but are just as true. That there's things that a well-run organization should be looking at its footprint, should be divesting some of its legacy things to invest in new capabilities. And so I grant that people, some of them are politically. It's not hard to be for passing an audit. Right. Some of the other things that we want to do, and we need to do all of them at the same time, of course, is finding the resources to support the department's missions, as well as trying to make ourselves better in terms of IT processes, business processes, audit, and infrastructure and other things. So I would just ask people consideration that when we're trying to do all these things at once, so we know that we need to do better on the processes needed to satisfy an auditor, but that is just as true that when we say that we need to have less restrictions on our force structure from Congress, or when we need support for base closure, we have a proposal we think makes a lot of sense to consolidate our TRICARE systems, that those deserve serious consideration as well. I mean, all these things are ones that don't pay off the next day, but they pay off down the road. And again, I'm talking about in the 20s. There is a bill. It was true in the early 60s, and it was true under Reagan. It's once in a generation there comes a bill to modernize the triad if you're going to have a triad, and that bill is going to come in the 20s. And so investments that we make today, whether it be base closure or IT or something else, can save us money. They won't help meet a budget target in 17, but they still can be important, to help us save money down the road. So the audit is one of those long-term efforts.
All right, so I want to quickly, before we're done here, I want to open it up for questions. I saw Pat back here in the back had a question.
Mike? I'm troubled by your thinking that your budgetary future in the midterm, 5 years out, at least 221, is all that uncertain. I mean, first of all, BCA is not this free-floating entity out there in the void. It's a reflection of a generational battle over the role of the state in the life of the society, and it's been going on for a decade or two, and it's going to go on through another 2 or 3 or 4 presidential cycles. But in the meantime, we've got this one-time fix, and yeah, it was supposed to be so terrible that it would force action. It didn't. But what it has done, we do know what the shape of the line looks like. I mean, you get 50% of the delta between the defense request and the defense cap for that year. You add that amount to both caps, and that's, that was what we did in 13, it's what we did in 14. You got lucky in this time, you're better off. And we know that you're getting some of the fixes. I mean, you're getting the compensation stuff. I mean, not as fast as you'd like, but you're getting it. You're getting the Apaches moved. You're probably not going to get the A-10s canceled until you stop deploying them. You know, that's a problem. But, you know, it's not all that unpredictable. Now, you say the demand signal doesn't justify anything as hard to reverse as a force structure cut. All right, fair enough. But it seems to me you could reasonably surmise that at least through 21, we're going to follow this pattern of you're going to get 50% of the delta between the cap and the request. Is there nothing less than force structure cuts, but more than sliding the last pay day of the fiscal year to October 1? You know, is there nothing in that mid-range that you can do structurally to say, hey, you know, the skimmer just isn't a relevant benchmark anymore. Here's something we can do in this, you know, short to medium term time frame, a structural adaptation to what we know is coming down the track.
Okay, yeah, I would grant your point, Pat, that through 21 you can probably guess that you're going to be at somewhere the midpoint, or maybe a little better. Other than the fact that we have, you know, a change of administration, which adds some additional uncertainty as to, I mean, we might, for all I know, have a next president that thinks the BCA is the greatest idea ever and has no interest in seeking additional resources above the BCA. I don't, you know, we'll know more about that in a year. Yeah, there are things that we can do, and they tend to involve, you know, looking at what either lower priority programs or things that can be rephased. My point was that, particularly on the ground force side, you know, there's been proposals floating around. I'm sure everyone's heard them about shrinking the ground forces, you know, especially if you can't get BCA relief, and there's a lot of angst about that. So I don't think that it's realistic to think you can achieve that without a clearer demand signal about what people want, and that's been part of the frustration I think that not only we've had in the department but the defense committees have had is you know, I think our defense committees have kind of taken the position that you know, the ground forces should not shrink, or in general the force structure should not shrink, but a lot of their colleagues outside the defense community don't agree with them, and so you know, that's been somewhat of an uncertain point. I think really the uncertainty is more about beyond the BCA. You're right, and again, that's where we have a lot of concern. This is not a problem that I think, frankly, we can do that much to solve in this administration of what's going to happen in the 2020s, you know, in the period that starts after the next administration's first term. But it is something that, because we tend to get to do so much long-term thinking at DoD, as we look at when I say the triad, I'm particularly talking about when we start modernizing the Ohio-class submarines, which we start in 21. It's going to stretch over about a 15-year period, and those boats are so expensive that I'm sure any of you who follow the Navy, the Navy has expressed a lot of concern that until you can prove to me it's not going to come out of my shipbuilding budget, then I'm going to keep waving my arms around until somebody, you know, notices my problem and tells me how we're going to solve it. And you know, right now it's probably not in our power to tell them how it's going to be solved. We're kind of in the stages of socializing the problem, I guess I would say. The committees, I think, get it already, but trying to maybe get it understood a little more broadly and then start to talk about what might be a solution. So I think that longer term is more of a concern for us. I mean, the easy solution for DoD would be we just need to bump up in resources that only last 15 straight years. That's probably not realistic, though. So, but the first thing we need to do is at least make sure people understand our problem, so that when there are budget negotiations, that's understood. And I think that was one thing that we really did appreciate from this budget deal, was that it's a very easy thing. And I've been around the budget scene a long time here, to just say, well, I'll pay for $1 today by extending the caps and promising it's more restrained in 2024 or something. We were very grateful that didn't happen this time, so that it leaves the field more neutral for that future period. But again, I mean, in terms of just dealing with the rest of the BCA, the rest of that BCA period, the levers are out there. You're right. I mean, you know, there's compensation, and there's the size of the force, and there's modernization, and that's about it. Readiness, I don't think, is going to be that much of a lever on the table. I don't think that anybody really wants a force, whatever it is, to be any less ready. If anything, we'd like to rebuild on the full spectrum side a little bit. So I think that lever is kind of less available to us. And on compensation, as you say, we've gotten some progress on what I call maybe more the direct pay side. So we've got some support on things like pay raise and housing for our proposals, and less so on things like healthcare. Healthcare is more complicated. There's a lot of talk. Next year, the committees are going to dive into healthcare, and so that will be a big, hopefully something that we can all work together on next year to kind of build off of the consensus on retirement this year, or the pretty near consensus anyway, to make some progress on the healthcare side next year. We've already seen some progress in controlling those costs, but still structurally, I think there's more that we can do there.
So I know we're over our time. One last question.
Hi, Tony Bertuca, Inside Defense. You mentioned the coming increase to the ERI in the FY17 budget. I was wondering if you could tell us how Americans and members of the U.S. military should expect that increase to manifest itself. And also, since ISIL has proven to be a threat to European security, how should Americans and Europeans and members of the military expect the counter-ISIL budgetary commitment to increase in FY17?
Okay. Well, let me start with the European side. Again, I think what we're looking at is a more robust version of what we've been doing. So, exercising, having more presence there, and more troop rotations. Not going back to the old days of having 300,000 people permanently stationed there necessarily, but continuing the higher level of presence and exercising, especially with our more Eastern European partners, as well as looking at now some more permanent investment. I think that's the difference that we're looking at this year, some more permanent investment, whether it be pre-positioning or basing, for some additional presence and additional posture and capability in Europe that would be of a more longer-term nature. What we are not talking about would be having the U.S. Department of Defense help police up the immigration system or the influx of people, into Europe from the Middle East. That kind of thing that's something the Europeans need to handle for themselves. But we're talking here on the European side a more traditional military role still. So the ISIL effort, I think, will be dealt with as a military operation, and European as military operation. The connection between the two and the refugee flow is not something I think that would not be on our plate to work. So I think that you'll see these things tend to be, again, the European side I think will tend to look at where can we do something that's a little more substantial, given a little more time to plan in this budget. Whereas on the ISIL side, I think it will tend to be more operationally focused on operations in the Middle East.
All right, well, I want to thank you for coming out on this day, and a lot of great information you shared with us. So thank you for coming to CSIS. We'll have to have you back again.
Okay, thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Thank you.